Hello and welcome to this episode of Standard Deviation, my column and video series. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about the great opportunity Prime Minister Narendra Modi has before him when it comes to the Interim Budget 2024, which will come on Feb 1st. Now that the Ram Temple consecration is done, PM Modi can turn his attention back to policy making. And with the interim budget around the corner on Feb 1st, he has quite an opportunity before him. He has a unique chance to elevate the maturity of India's discourse. But to do this, he must ensure that the upcoming budget speech doesn't devolve into pre-election propaganda. In other words, PM Modi must distinguish between the country and the ruling party, which is a distinction that is one of the hallmarks of a mature democracy. Interim budgets are distinct from normal annual union budgets. They're supposed to be simple votes on account that provide the government with enough funds to run the country until the general elections are decided and the new government announces a full-fledged budget for the year. Even the term interim budget isn't actually official. Officially, it's called a vote on account. The politicization of conventional union budgets largely began under Indira Gandhi in the 1970s. But coming as they do just months before the Lok Sabha elections, the interim budgets also provide a very tempting vote-getting tool. But if PM Modi is confident about winning a historic third term, then he must use this unique opportunity to decisively bifurcate economic and fiscal policy from the short-term aims of winning elections. This will also send a message about the maturity he wants to bring in his third term, should it happen. To do this, PM Modi and FM Nirmala Sitharaman will have to break away from the relatively recent past. The interim budget of 2019, presented to Parliament by then Finance Minister Piyush Goyal in February of that year, included several announcements that were entirely populist in nature and seemed aimed at the elections that year. These included the PM Kisan scheme, under which regular doles were promised to farmers, the PM Shram Yogi Man Dhan, which provided pensions to unorganized sector workers, and a few significant changes to the income tax slabs to reduce the tax burden on those at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, I'm not saying that these were unnecessary announcements. That's a matter of debate. But the point remains that such announcements could have been made earlier. It's not as if the government doesn't think through the fiscal impact months in advance. Instead, it chose to announce these decisions in the interim budget just before the Lok Sabha elections in 2019. This mindset of aligning economic policy to the aim of winning elections is also clear in how this government has been regulating the price of fuel. An analysis done by ThePrint earlier has shown the remarkable coincidence of fuel prices remaining unchanged just before assembly elections, only to be changed right after. It happens time and time again. There's already some buzz that fuel prices, which have been kept unchanged for more than 2 years now, will be lowered just before this year's elections. Even if they are, the vehicle of this change should not be the budget. Even the announcement that the government's free food program would be extended for 5 years was made by the Prime Minister during an election rally in Chhattisgarh in November 2023, just a week before the state went to vote. A few months earlier, in August, the government announced a 200 rupees per cylinder subsidy on LPG for all customers, not just the poor ones. Here, the benefit of the doubt can be given to the government since it was still more than 2 months before the assembly elections in 5 states that year. But knowing how strategically PM Modi and the BJP think about elections, it's entirely possible that this decision too was politically motivated. Previous interim budgets, the ones before 2019, did keep elections in mind, but they were more circumspect about it. For example, P. Chidambaram's interim budget speech of 2014 announced subsidy expenditure of 2.46 lakh crore, which was marginally higher than the 2.45 lakh crore his government had spent the previous year. In contrast, Piyush Goyal in 2019 announced a 12% increase in subsidy spending in his interim budget, with the highest jump coming in the form of LPG subsidies. Now, one of P. Chidambaram's decisions that could be seen as populist was extending the scope of the central scheme for interest subsidy on educational loans, but this was something that his government had announced way back in 2009. It wasn't a new announcement. Surprisingly, Pranab Mukherjee, in his interim budget of 2009, actually announced a lower subsidy outlay than his government had spent in the previous year. It's another matter that the actual spending in 2009-10 was much more than what Pranab Mukherjee announced, because that spending wouldn't have impacted the 2009 Lok Sabha elections in any case. As far as I can tell, there weren't any announcements in Pranab Mukherjee's interim budget that could be directly linked to attracting votes. Now, it's not as if Interim Budget 2024 needs to be without any substance at all. There are a lot of substantial things the government can still do, which might even yield some positive electoral impact, but that will certainly help the country in the future. It's important to address the alarming findings in the latest annual status of education report about India's abysmal education level. One of the many such findings was that 1/4 of India's teenagers struggle to read even a class 2 text. We're already facing an unemployment crisis. Unless we make our youth employable, this is only going to worsen. This is one place the interim budget can help, by making plain the government's intention to bring education to front and center of its policy making, should it return to power this year. Another area that's perfectly designed for the short-term nature of the interim budget is providing aid to exporters suffering due to what's happening in the Red Sea. Exporters are seeing 1/4 of their shipments that would otherwise go through the Suez Canal held up and delayed by weeks and months. A lot of these exporters are small businesses that run on credit. They need help while the Red Sea issue persists. Once the new government comes in, it can reevaluate whether this help is still needed when it presents its full budget. But for now, the interim budget can certainly alleviate the issue for the next few months. Returning to the issue of making a clear distinction between the nation and the ruling party, Prime Minister Modi could learn a thing or two from how the US views such things. Speaking at the closing ceremony of the World Economic Forum in Davos, David Rubenstein, co-founder of the Carlyle Group, made clear how his country is likely to view any fiscal move that's made too close to the elections. This is what he said, and I quote, "In our country, we have a presidential election, and as a result, the Federal Reserve wants to get its rate cuts out of the way before the presidential election is in full steam. Because if you have rate cuts right before a presidential election, it'll be seen as helping the candidate who is in the White House." I close quotes. Of course, Rubenstein isn't a government official in the US and does not represent the Federal Reserve, but what he said on a global forum attended by world leaders is nevertheless important. It shows that some decisions need to be delinked from politics and taken solely in the interests of the nation. Contrast this with how commonplace and accepted it has become for governments in India, at the center and in the states, to announce economic and fiscal decisions right before elections with the sole purpose of winning votes. This needs to change. India is now more than 3/4 of a century old. It's time to show some maturity, and a good place for the Modi government to start would be with Interim Budget 2024. On that note, that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching.